All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Financially Legal, the podcast for insight at the intersection of money and the business of law. I'm your host, Emery Wager, co founder of Confido Legal, an integrated payments and finance platform specifically designed for the legal industry. And today, I am really excited about this episode. We're going to welcome Gary Allen to the show. So, Gary Allen had a multi-decade career in law. He actually just retired a few months ago, not from work in general, but from law. So congrats, Gary.
Thank you, Emery. Thanks for having me.
So he had a little bit of a rocky start to his legal career, which we'll talk about here in a second. But then he went to work at Givens Pursley, where he had a 30-year career, made partner, and built a $1 million practice in environmental and land use law. So he got to see the way a well-run firm is run. He has, we were talking before this episode, he's worked for over 1,000 clients and opened and closed several thousand matters over the course of his career. Um, he, after what, this is a somewhat maybe negative characterization, but I didn't know about this. After somewhat of a false start in the early 2000s, he co-founded LeanLaw in 2015, which was designed to operationalize in software a lot of the concepts that we'll talk about today. And we will talk a little bit about LeanLaw towards the end. But Gary has seen the good, the bad, and the ugly as a practicing attorney. He's also helped thousands of law firms in his capacity at LeanLaw. So Gary really knows his stuff here, and I am very excited to have him here on the podcast today. So Gary, welcome to Financially Legal.
Thanks so much, Emery. I'm really stoked to be here.
Awesome. Well, let's start and talk about that rocky beginning that you had in your legal career. Of course,
Yeah.
you ended up in a great place, but how did things start out?
So we're talking well into the past century. So this I've been at this a long time, but I started in a small firm in San Diego. With really nice people, really great lawyers, but it was not a well-run law firm. And one of the characteristics of lawyers is we learn nothing about business. There were no courses about the business of law offered at Stanford Law School.
Mm-hmm.
So I came out with no background, and I came into this firm and I noticed there were a lot of meetings in the back room and people whispering this and that and talking about, kind of gossiping. And it's like, wow, what's going on here? And yeah, I had never really had a real job before working for somebody else anyway. And
Mm-hmm.
sure enough, after about 2 years working there, the firm broke into several pieces. And I was fortunate to move with a partner into a larger firm in San Diego. But that was a very scary moment, just having your firm break up underneath you. So that was my first experience with that. Um,
And there were some life experiences going on parallel that made that a little more stressful, if I
well,
remember.
Well, that was a little later on. That was the
Okay.
second one. So I moved to a larger firm in San Diego, which is now part of the largest law firm in the world. I never would have gone if it had been that at the time. And it was it was a well-run law firm in a lot of ways. It absolutely worked me to death there, and we wound up moving to Boise and other things in a couple of years. But what's interesting about that firm is they were transparent about their finances to some extent. So
Mm-hmm.
I got to see what my billings were and what my overhead was in that firm. And I looked at the overhead number, which in this was not 1990. It was $220,000 a year per lawyer. This is how much I
That was
had to
just for
pay.
you.
Just me, measly third year associate. And so I went to my mentor and I said, "Oh my gosh, look at this overhead. We could operate for so much less here. This is crazy." And what he told me is overhead is too hard to deal with. Focus on bringing in more revenue. And that's very common in the legal industry, but it's a fallacy because if you're chasing revenue all the time, you always have to chase more revenue, right? You don't have recurring revenue in a law
Mhm.
firm the same way you have in a software company. And so you're chasing that all the time. Overhead, if you get it right, you've made that change forever, or at least for a long period of time. So you can continue to get the benefit of those efficiencies. But nobody thinks that way in the legal industry almost.
Mhm.
So that was my second experience. We left town, went to Boise, was working for the branch office of a large firm. And after about 2 years, that firm blew up over the branch office was closed over an overhead dispute. And on a Saturday
Wow.
afternoon, I got a call from the office manager, the managing partner of the office, who said, "We're closing the office. You don't have a job." So I had a 6-month-old baby
Oh my
and
gosh.
sitting there with no job. So that's a moment I will not forget. And way too many people experience that in law firms. And that's kind of what drives my passion.
Mhm.
So that firm was spectacularly inefficient.
Mhm.
They were great lawyers and had a great reputation, but nobody was making any money.
Mhm.
And that's no fun when you're working as hard as you are as a lawyer and you just can barely pay the bills. So I was really fortunate to land on my feet at Givens Pursley, as you mentioned, and
Mhm.
began a 30-year career there. And I consider Ken Pursley, the managing partner there, to be a true law business genius. And
Mhm.
he had designed a system where people were accountable for their own work and rewarded based on their own work, where overhead was low and was kept low, which is somewhat of a difficult feat in a law firm.
Mhm.
And frankly, just all the BS I had experienced out of bigger firms was gone. I mean,
Mhm.
you didn't have a department meeting every 2 days that you had to go to, and you
Mhm.
could focus on practicing law. And that led to a much happier career and some of the things we want to talk about today
Mhm.
that I think should be shared by all law firms. So I'm really excited to walk through how we make law firms into better businesses, which is really
Yeah.
my passion through all of this.
Awesome. Well, yeah, I'm excited to dive in. And I guess before we dive into the numbers and the key metrics and whatnot, can you tell us a little bit more about like what was the feeling when you're walking the halls of a firm that's run well versus one that has that high overhead and it's basically people working to death and treading
Right,
water financially?
right. Well, what you notice most at a high overhead, inefficient firm is that is a big burden. And I've heard people talk about it like, how much of my year do I have to work before I've covered the nut?
Mm-hmm.
And in most law firms, that's about 50%. So you're working all the way through June before you make a penny.
That's,
uh,
that's so wild.
and so you're carrying that load around all the time. And when you think about, am I going to bill that 10-minute call to my client? You're thinking about that.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I felt when I moved into Givens Pursley is that weight was lifted. Givens Pursley does a lot of other good things, like
Mm-hmm.
they encourage individuality and they like to think of themselves as mavericks a little bit, as much as a Tony law firm can be mavericks. But there was some reality to that too. So you could kind of be yourself, and as
Mm-hmm.
long as you really were responsible for your own economic well-being in the firm. If you billed and collected, you got paid.
Mm-hmm.
And if you didn't, you didn't get paid. So that a lot of people call that an eat what you kill system. I mean, that's what our competitors called us pejoratively, but it's only rough like that if the culture is rough as well. It's like you're on your own.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a culture where somebody wasn't doing well, people would step up, help get them work. So we supported each other, but still had individual accountability, which frees you up so that you can, well, first of all, if you're a really hard worker, you get compensated really well
Mm-hmm.
because the firm isn't taking any risk on the downside. You can be compensated on the upside.
Hmm.
Secondly, it allows flexibility. There are a number of partners, typically women, but not exclusively, who wanted to focus on family at a
Hmm.
certain point in their careers. And this allows that.
Hmm.
Okay, you work less. There may be some minimums there because you do have some overhead you've got to bear,
Hmm.
but you can work a lot less and nobody cares. That's your issue.
Yep.
Um, so it was really healthy that way. Lots of things about practicing law are not that pleasant.
Hmm.
So anything you add to that is really amplified. So you want to just keep the business part of it as simple and easy as possible.
Hmm. Awesome. Awesome. Well, one of the things that stuck with me that you and I were talking about a few weeks ago was how when you look at some of the financial metrics, which I'm excited to get into here, the difference between a well-run firm and a not so well-run firm in a lot of these places is not huge kind of as a percentage, but when you
Mhm.
add all of these things up, the impact is astonishing
It is. It
at a
is.
firm, the way it kind of compounds like this. So
Yeah,
uh,
it's definitely death by a thousand cuts in a typical law firm. But yeah, it adds up in spectacular ways.
yeah, interesting. So let's dive into that a little bit. As you're looking at over your career and working with thousands of law firms through LeanLaw, what are some of those kind of key metrics that you want to look at as
Yeah,
a law firm owner? What are you looking to optimize?
yeah. So would this be a good time to bring up the report card, maybe?
Yeah, let's do it. So
Okay,
this is
so,
our, by the way, this is our first screen share on Financially Legal. So
oh, you're kidding.
bear with us
At
here.
least I didn't prepare PowerPoint slides.
Yeah. There's only one slide, so don't worry.
All right, can you
All
see
right.
that now? There we
Yeah,
go.
should be up and rolling.
Okay, so this is a widget that I put together a few weeks ago following on a webinar that I did for the Association of Legal Administrators. And I call it the Law Firm Financial Report Card. I was having a post-webinar session with a law firm administrator who's just going, all right, so we talked about how you compensate lawyers. What are the important metrics? So again, there are other metrics that kind of apply to graduate school. This is kindergarten right here, but most law firms fail kindergarten. So let's go through the basics here. So we start with capacity. How much can you bill? Well, actually, this here I have a number of attorneys in the firm. Then we have the capacity per attorney, which is, all right, if you're on budget, essentially, how much, how many dollars can you bill? I don't like focusing on hours. Hours are nothing unless they become dollars. So what are the potential dollars that we're working with? So this is not unusual, say $500,000, which would be X hours times X average billable rate. And then I gave an opportunity here to say, well, are you underperforming as far as your capacity relative to your competition? So you could say, well, we do have some room to grow on that front. Then, so you multiply that by the number of attorneys, you have the firm capacity. So that's the starting place. The next thing you look at is how much of that capacity are you using? So that's the billable time that was worked within the firm. And that should be measurable in dollars as well. And whatever relationship that has with your capacity. Once you've figured out utilization, then, all right, you work that time. How much of it were you actually able to bill to clients? And that's some other reduction relative to that. Then you have collection. How much did you actually collect? That's what really matters, right? And so many firms lose track of this. It's really strange. Read the news about failed law firms, and you'll see so many of them defaulted on a $16 million loan or
Mhm.
couldn't pay back their line of credit. It's like, why are you drawing on your line of credit? Why aren't you a cash-based business? Because law firms, generally speaking, produce a lot of cash. So that's
It's
obviously
so
a
crazy to
critical
me
metric.
just to drill into that metric. I mean, I think the data is like, between when the work actually gets done and when the money actually comes in is something like 90 days on average. So it's like
I know,
you're going to work on a contract today, and that work you're going to get paid for next quarter, which is
right?
absolutely insane. I mean, that is like you're bankrolling your clients.
Right. Yeah, it's amazing how readily law firms drop into the banker role.
Yeah.
And there are really good tools available like Confido, which can allow you to get paid electronically instantly. So what are you doing? Bankrolling your client for months. They may like it if you allow them to do that, but there's really no reason for that.
Yeah. I mean, how
Yeah.
many, other business where the default terms are net 90?
Yeah, I wish I had more vendors like that.
Yeah. No.
Exactly.
But sorry to interrupt you there. I'd yeah, just
No,
wanted
no,
to drill in a little bit. Mhm.
that's an important place to do that. And finally, there's overhead. So you've got your revenue, and you subtract your overhead, and that's your profit. And it's important to mention the way I think about overhead here, which is overhead is all your expenses minus what you pay the people who bill. So we treat everybody like a profit center who bills time so that you can actually measure that. And so what's left over to pay all of those timekeepers once you take away your office expense and your secretaries and file clerks and all the other things that law firms have in the back office, and that's your profit. So those are the metrics. That gets you from revenue minus overhead equals profit. You've got certain elements of revenue and how you get to revenue that you should keep track of. Now, you started this by saying, well, the percentages are pretty small between a good firm and an average firm, yet it really adds up. So, should we dive into that part of this?
Yeah, yeah. Let's
Yeah,
dive into. To me, that part is just fascinating.
yeah, because it is amazing how much difference that makes. So the capacity is what the capacity is. And it's a good thing to look at increasing the capacity you can have with your existing timekeepers. That's kind of a topic for another day. We're just talking about turning what you have into dollars. So a good benchmark for utilization is if you hit 95% of your budget. That's what a good firm does. An average firm can be, here I've got them at 88%. So let's say that's okay. You can see it as low as 75%. And we treat 88% as a C here. And what does that cost? That's what these categories are here for, what these columns are here for. So just the difference between 95 and 88% is $30,000 a year per lawyer. And over the course of that lawyer's career, you just cost yourself $1 million just because you're not consistently producing the work time that you should. And that's just the beginning here. Then there's another drop off, realization, another good benchmark, about 95%. Actually, Givens Pursley is higher on all three of these. 97, 98%, that's really tippy top, but this is still pretty good.
Hmm.
And it's not uncommon to see a firm at 82%. I just heard a consultant say that 87% was fantastic in this category. But what does it cost you to be at 82% opposed to 95%? Well, we give that a D. That's not very good. Costs you almost $50,000 a year per lawyer, almost $2 million over the course of your career, because that time you work, you're unable to bill it. And when I read some of the literature about this, like, well, there are all kinds of reasons why you might not be able to bill that time. Well, as a business person, you need to be dialing into that to go, wait a minute. what's going on? We thought that that was worth billing to, we were creating value for the client, or why would we do the work? And most law firms are really not very good about sussing that out. They're not very good about communicating. And I
Mhm.
was never great at this myself as a lawyer, I will admit. And so you wind up leaving a massive amount of money on the table.
Mhm. Mhm.
So now we're down to collection. And again, 95%, very good benchmark. Okay, here in our example, we're at 89%. We give that a C. A B level would have been 90. Though there's another 20,000 bucks per lawyer, 100,000 over the course of a career if you do that consistently.
And that's got to be the I don't know if you agree with this, Gary, but that's got to be the easiest thing to tackle, that collection rate, because you've already decided to bill it. You've already put it on an invoice. You've already sent it out. And so that's a huge number. And it almost all of it is profit because you've already done all of the offsetting work for it. So that
Exactly.
revenue just drops straight to the bottom line. I would think that's the first place you'd want to,
Yeah,
to
that
dig.
exactly. Yeah, everybody can see that you build it, you don't get paid. What happened?
Mhm.
So either you did not do a very good job vetting your client. You're going through, you're like,
Mhm.
they can't pay, or they won't pay, which means you did a really poor job communicating with your client or getting surety from your client. So
Yeah.
you've again allowed yourself to become the bank, and they
Mhm.
default. And what are you going to do? Like law firms almost never sue a client for unpaid fees because they get sued back for malpractice or whatever.
Mhm.
And it's like, it's just a huge cluster. I mean, I think there's such a room for getting that dealt with up front so
Yeah.
that the law firm is in a position of strength once it's time. The client's going, I don't want to pay that bill. It's like, sorry, we did exactly what we said we were going to do. And
Mhm.
we're either going to charge that through, or you've got something to protect yourself.
Mhm.
So why wouldn't you do that as a business person? Every other kind of business does that.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah. So that's collection. Now we've got the revenue side is set. Then you've got overhead. And in this example, we have a relatively minor overhead adjustment. This firm's not doing too badly at 38%. Overhead is a percentage of revenue. If I had put this at the industry average of, let's see, if I can do this here, 4 million would give us about 50%. So that's the industry average, 50% compared to our benchmark of 30.
Mhm.
Now we've just added $32,000 to the bottom line just by becoming efficient in the way that we spend money. So that's another $1.2 million. Now it's kind of getting to your final point is, okay, those were relatively minor differences mostly. And so what does that mean to the bottom line? So the efficient firm is now about 51% overall productivity compared to 32% for an average firm. That is $144,000 that each lawyer is leaving on the table because they're not a well-run business
Every year.
every year. So almost $6 million. That's before tax. I'll give you that. But
Mhm.
that is a really fine retirement that you just gave away. So I feel like this has resonated with the people we've shared it with.
Mhm.
And it's pretty shocking to me. I mean, I'd never really thought about the cost over the course of the career,
Mhm.
but it's like, boy, I wish I'd spent some more time thinking about the business. But fortunately, Givens Pursley did a pretty good job of that. So I
That
didn't suffer the worst of all of this.
that's yeah, it's amazing to see, like you said, death by a thousand cuts, things dropping out of the funnel along the way. That's
Yeah. Yeah.
very striking.
And I know very few law firms that do a good job of this. I mean, there are some, who particularly manage the revenue side fairly well. We have one client, I believe they're working with you guys. Every client has a retainer, an evergreen retainer. So
Hmm.
they have to replenish it every month. That client told us that that was adding $1 million a year to his bottom line to do things that way. So why
That's
wouldn't you
amazing.
consider strategies like that for your law firm? I don't know.
Hmm. And it was, if I remember right, it was kind of an overnight shift. They implemented that evergreen retainer model, and
Yeah,
all of a sudden they had $1 million after a few
right,
months more in the bank.
right, right, exactly. And that's complicated to pull that off. Look at that payoff.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you think about doing that?
Hmm. Yeah. I want to get to compensation because
Yeah.
you just did a really interesting webinar with the ALA on compensation. But maybe since we were just talking about kind of these metrics, I'd like to kind of lead into your work at LeanLaw a little bit. Speak to maybe the law firm that's watching right now or listening and is saying that's all well and good, but I don't even know what those are at my firm.
Yikes. Hopefully they know what collections are. Or yeah, they may be beyond hope. Yeah,
Maybe I know what those are, but I don't have a good solution in place to track those.
if you can't, it'd be much more common to say I can't track those.
Hmm.
And when we started LeanLaw, frankly, originally envisioned it as almost like a combined software service system that would run the whole back office
Hmm.
of the law firm so the lawyers could focus on practicing law. But what we came to is pretty complicated problems to solve. Well, what's the most important one that we can influence? And that was to focus on the finances of the law firm.
Hmm.
And so if you've got bad metrics here, the most important thing you need to be able to do is bill and collect, right? So think about going from a all paper system to a system like this firm we talked about. All paper system, you lose that 90 days at least in terms of getting paid. The number of invoices you collect is decreased dramatically. People pay those slower and less surely. And so, why not move to a modern system where everybody gets an electronic invoice and everybody gets paid electronically? So now you know where the money, you know how to bill and collect the money in an efficient way. So, as you could see from those numbers, that's going to improve your bottom line a lot right there. And since Lean Law is so deeply focused on finance, I mean, we've done a lot of things other tools haven't done in terms of making that a super smooth workflow. So, we have an invoice, a fully customizable email that goes with your invoice. It includes a statement of your account automatically in the invoice. It will attach a trust statement and a full invoice. It just gives you a Cadillac way to present that in a way that if you're either making those emails by hand or you're using a generic tool, you're not getting that. Then we fully embed Confido links within those invoices so that people can just click a button and pay now. And that also automates all of the accounting. So essentially, you've got a fully automated billing and collection system end to end. And if I'm a all-in-one practice management tool, today I'm thinking about document management. Tomorrow I'm thinking about docketing. The next day I'm doing something with email. And oh yeah, let's think about the finances at some point.
Hmm.
Well, we think there's a real advantage to being we focus on the money, follow the money. That's the secret to your happiness in a law firm. So that's one side of this. The other side of it is you can't do any of this if you can't measure it. So
Hmm.
you need really good reporting of all sorts of things in the law firm. It starts with the metrics that we talked about. And even going back from there, your WIP build collected, so you can do the invoicing and payments. Um, and then it's like, okay, what else do I need to keep track of? If I'm talking about compensation, which we will in a second, got to be able to track that. If it's an objective system, which I think is the only good system for a law firm, you need to keep track of your receivables in various forms. There are, unless you're really smart and don't have any receivables. And your tool has to be able to track all of that stuff in an intelligent way. And law firms have 100 different metrics once you get past kind of the kindergarten ones that
Hmm.
they want to measure. And as somebody who's really focused on that, we can dive into that with you. We still get stumped occasionally, but uh, because that's our specialty, we think we are among the best, if not the best, in that respect.
Yeah. Awesome. So if someone wants to understand that baseline and get access to that report card, can they reach out to you? What's the best way?
Yeah, absolutely. We're just building the landing page for that right now, but you can just reach out to me, just email me, gary.allen@myleanlaw.com.
Awesome. And
Yeah,
you have a tool to measure those key metrics on an ongoing basis. You can plug those in and see where you stand. If you have any C's, D's, and F's, that's, I'm sure we could talk about that, but beyond the scope of this
this,
episode.
if
But
you get the report card, there's a second tab on there called strategies, which will give you at least the top level strategies for how to address each one of those issues. And we are working on detailed content with more about all of that. So we see a demand there for more on that front, and we'll be providing that soon.
awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, really amazing free resource there. So let's shift gears a little bit and talk compensation. You did a great webinar a few weeks ago with the ALA on compensation. Give us maybe the kind of the high level, the cliffs notes of that webinar and some of the key takeaways.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. As I put that webinar together, I was thinking, how do I make law firm compensation a compelling topic? And so I thought of it in a way that I had experienced it in my life, which is it is about saving your firm.
Hmm.
So the law firm was called Save Your Firm.
Hmm.
It's about how to put together a law firm compensation system in 1 hour. So the scenario is that your managing partner comes in and talks to you as the legal administrator, says, I just found out that our most productive partners are leaving. I need you to put together an idea for the best compensation system to keep them here.
Hmm.
And so we go through that and we talk about the different personas in a law firm who you have to watch out for in your compensation system. Because I think it's most interesting and telling to talk about the people as opposed to some system or other. So you in typical law firm, you're going to have a founding partner, a senior partner who's going to value their equity and what they've put into the firm over the years. You're going to have young partners who are like producing a lot. And if they're in a system that doesn't compensate that, like a lockstep system, they're going to be very grumpy. And that's typically been what's blown up a lot of law firms is those partners coming of age leave.
Hmm.
Um, you've got the lifestyle partners who, they may want to work hard later, but just want to stay in the game. And it doesn't work well if you have an 1,800-hour billable budget. You've got hardworking associates. You've got not so hardworking associates. Same thing with paralegals. So how do you accommodate all of those people in the system? And I start with values. What really keeps law firms together are the values of the firm. And there are three values that I think are critical that have to be part of the mix for every law firm. And one of them, the biggest one, is trust. And so if you don't trust your partners, your firm is not going to last long. And a lot of these systems don't facilitate trust. An equity system doesn't facilitate trust because it, just says, oh, the only thing that matters is that you've been here a long time. Then the second thing is accountability. You have to be responsible for producing what you get paid for.
Hmm.
And um, I think that doesn't work very well as a top down matter. It kind of has to be self executing. So that's a huge deal. And I'm forgetting what the third one is. But I'll
But
come
you
back to that.
on
But
the
those,
spot with this one. So.
yeah, let's start with the top two.
Yeah.
Um, and so now you say, okay, what really accomplishes, what systems get you
Hmm.
where you want to go as far as those things go.
Hmm.
And so traditionally, you've had a lockstep system where people are paid based on shares that they have
Hmm.
acquired over the years. Typically, the senior partners have the most of the equity, so they
Hmm.
get the most compensation. That system has failed, in my opinion. It
Hmm.
just doesn't work in the reality of law practice these days. Um,
I mean, some might call it a pyramid scheme.
you could offer that characterization. I mean, I think there's value in equity, right?
Hmm.
Somebody built up that firm over however many years. That should be recognized, and there should, it creates some common purpose, so it's not totally everybody for themselves. So an equity
Yeah.
component in a system, I think, is valuable. You have a lot of systems where there is like a compensation committee, and so they'll look at various factors of your production and things, which is good. But every firm I've ever heard of like that has a lot of politicking going on, which is really bad for building trust. And it's also rough on accountability because it's typically backward looking. So you get your shares for the next year based on what you did last year. Well, that seems like a really good time to take a vacation if you had a big year
Hmm.
last year.
Yeah.
So it creates some perverse incentives.
Probably tough. We started this episode out about overhead. I'll bet it's kind of tough on overhead too if you have such a complicated committee driven structure that it takes, finance people to calculate it and, the
Yeah.
top people at the firm to decide on it. Um, I would assume where you're getting, you're going up into the 40-50% range.
Yeah, I think the thing about overhead, the key point on overhead is overhead needs to be transparent. You want a lot of eyes on it because people have an incentive to kind of sneak a little extra for themselves. I need a half of an assistant, but I sure don't want to pay for one.
Hmm.
So if everybody's watching the overhead pot, like Givens Pursley, the overhead allocation was on the spreadsheet every month. So you knew exactly how much that was. And uh, people watched it like a hawk. And if you make that a management function, then the managers tend to be more highly compensated. So they're less overhead sensitive. What you want is your younger lawyers looking at the overhead allocation, especially if it's done pro rata or
Hmm.
even proportionately, because
Hmm.
they're the ones who are going to go, well, we don't need a library anymore. We have the internet
Hmm.
or whatever overhead allocation it is, so that you're constantly beating up what you're spending money on.
Hmm.
So that's the key there. And so the bottom line on the compensation is the only thing that really works is some kind of objective system. And
Hmm.
it's measures what they call the hail and door components. That was a firm in the 40s that invented this. You compensate the finder, the minder, and the grinder. So the finder's the originating attorney. The minder is the responsible attorney, as it's often called, the one managing the client. And
Hmm.
then the grinder is the working attorney.
Hmm.
You can have other elements like equity. Givens Pursley had an equity element. And then subjective things, management, you can have components for that. But all those things need to be clear and transparent if you're going to create trust and accountability. And if you don't have that in your system, and that's not fairly instantaneously recognized by everybody if it's 9 months later through the compensation committee. You're going to have cultural problems. You're going to have a lack of trust and accountability, which is eventually can be the death of your law firm.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the compensation point.
Awesome. Well, yeah, really interesting. And just to kind of go back and summarize some of the key topics we hit on today. Gary, you brought up this amazing scorecard where law firms can plug in their kind of key metrics and see in bright colors how they are doing and identify key issue areas. And it sounds like even get some potential ideas on how to turn those from red to green. So and the differences aren't that stark. I mean, we talked about the difference between a 95% collection rate and 88%. Is that in and of itself is not that big, but it can cost, I think you had close to $1 million over the course of your
Exactly.
career just for that one metric. And so small changes, big impact there.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah. I kind of think of this as a legacy at this point, that what I want as I move into my later years here is to help law firms to become better businesses. And if that's, I hope they buy software from LeanLaw. But, just if they can find some nugget in any of this information that helps them get better, helps make everybody happier and more fulfilled in their work, I think that just always brightens my day when I hear stories of that. And I think the profession needs it, the lawyers need it, society needs it. We need lawyers to step up and take the profession to the next level. So
Mhm.
I love to be a little part of helping to make that happen.
That's awesome. That's awesome, Gary. And I think probably a great place to leave it today. So thank you so much for taking the time to come on today. If you're interested in listening to more financially legal episodes, you can follow Confido Legal on social channels, especially LinkedIn is where we post a lot of these notices of upcoming episodes. And if you are interested, most importantly, if you're interested in getting that scorecard, you can reach out to Gary or the folks at LeanLaw, and they'll get you access to that, and a great place to start to have a financially healthy practice. So, Gary, thanks so much for joining today.
Thank you, Emery.